What does a woman do when the river takes her house, her harvest, and the last proof she had of what was hers? Remedios Gutierrez had lived 70 years on the banks of the Cupatizio, in the hills of Michoacán, and she knew the answer the same way she knew everything else about that land, from the inside out. She stayed. This is Countryside Tales, and this is her story. If a woman who could not be moved by a flood moves something in you, subscribe to Countryside Tales and ring the notification bell. The Cupatizio ran high every rainy season, and Remedios had watched it from her own walls for 50 years. First as a girl in her mother's house, then as a wife in the house she and Luzaro had built together. Then as a widow in the house she had kept alone since Luzaro died 20 years ago, in March, with his boots still by the door. She knew the river's moods the way she knew the Mas Negro she planted every April, intimately, with patience, with respect for what it could do. She had never seen it do what it did on the night of the 14th of September. The water came in the dark, fast, without warning. By the time Remedios understood that the Cupatizio had jumped its banks and was moving across the milpa toward the house, she had time to take 3 things: the tin box of heirloom corn seeds that Lazaro's family had carried from Oaxaca 2 generations before, the rebozo morado her grandmother had left her, and Lazaro's almud, the worn wooden measuring vessel he had used every harvest since his own father placed it in his hands as a young man. She put the seeds and the almud inside the tin box, tied the rebozo across her chest, and climbed to the roof and stayed there through the night, while the Cupatizio took everything else. By morning, the walls were gone. The milpa was buried under a meter of gray-brown silt. The fruit trees were bent sideways. The kitchen was rubble. Remedios sat on what was left of the main roof beam, which had come to rest on the ground, and looked at what remained of 70 years of her family's life in that bend of the river. Don Victorio Morales arrived before the mud had dried. He came in a truck from the municipal road, too clean for what he was walking into, with his surveyor's assistant behind him. He had been trying to claim Remedios' land for 2 years. First with offers she rejected, then with a legal filing through a Moralia firm asserting that her deed had gaps in the registry and that the land had been sold by a previous owner before the Gutierrez family. She had been fighting that claim with the help of a local lawyer who charged more than she could easily afford. Victorio stopped a few steps from where she sat on the beam. He looked at the ruin around her with the expression of a man who had expected this. He took an envelope from his jacket. "Remedios," he said, "this has to be a sign from God. Take this money and start again somewhere you can actually live." She looked at the envelope. She looked at the buried milpa. She looked at the tin box in her lap. "No," she said. Victorio put the envelope back in his jacket. "You'll change your mind," he said. "I have not changed my mind in 70 years, said Remedios. "I don't know why I'd start now." He left. His assistant said nothing and followed. She did not have a house anymore, but she had the land. The difference between those 2 things had stopped frightening her sometime during the night on the roof. Ernesto, the young man from the property to the north, helped her build a shelter from the salvaged roof beams and a piece of corrugated tin he found in the debris. It was not a house. It was a dry place to sleep, and in the Sierra above the Cupatizio in September, that was enough. She swept the floor of it with a broom she found intact in the ruins, the handle bent, the bristles matted, but functional, and set the cot along the back wall and put the tin box on the corner of the cot and the almud beside it. And when she stepped back and looked at the arrangement, she thought, this is what a house begins as. 3 things you want to keep and a roof that keeps the rain off them. Concha, her neighbor of 40 years, came the second morning with frijoles de olla in a clay pot and her husband's old cot. She set the cot under the tin shelter and put the pot on the small fire Remedios had going and looked at the ruined milpa for a long time without speaking. "You should come to my house," said Concha. "I'm here," said Remedios. "I know you're here. I'm saying you don't have to be." "I know I don't have to be," said Remedios. "I'm here anyway." Concha sat down beside her. They ate the beans without saying much. Some things don't need more words than that. The following morning, Remedios opened the tin box. The seeds were dry. She had held the box above her head all night on the roof, and not one of them had gotten wet. She took out a handful of the Mas Negro, the long dark kernels that Zaro's grandmother had carried, wrapped in a cloth from the Caada of Oaxaca before the revolution, and she walked to the edge of the milpa, where the silt was thinnest, and planted them in a row with her finger. She knew they probably wouldn't take. The silt was too dense and raw. But she planted them anyway, the way her mother had told her to plant things when you don't know what else to do, with your back straight and your hands moving. She spaced the seeds with Luzaro's almud set on the ground between holes, the way he had always done it, not because she needed the guide, but because it was his, and she liked having it near. What she did not know yet was that the flood was not done with her. It had taken a great deal, and before the season was over, it was going to return something. Padre Yernimo came on the 4th day, making his way down the path from the road with his wooden staff and his black hat and his unhurried pace. He was 82 years old and had been the parish priest in that bend of the Cupatizio for 4 decades, long enough to have baptized Remedios's children and buried her husband and said the blessing over this milpa more times than either of them had kept count of. He stood at the edge of what had been the house and looked at the ruins for a long time without saying anything. "You're staying," he said. It was not a question. "I'm staying," said Remedios. The old priest nodded and pulled his collar straight. "Then I'll come on Tuesdays," he said. "I'll bring bread." He came on Tuesdays. He brought bread. And each time he came, he sat with Remedios for a while and looked at the silt drying slowly in the September sun, and neither of them said much, which was the right amount. Every morning had the same beginning. Remedios was up before the birds, fed sticks to the small fire, made her coffee in the blackened pot she had pulled from the ruins, and walked the edge of the milpa once while the coffee cooled. She checked what had come up from the previous day's planting. First nothing, then a pale thread of green here and there. Then, 2 weeks after the flood, actual seedlings standing in the silt. Small and improbable and alive. Each morning she knelt and counted them, and said a few words to Zaro without caring who heard. She had been talking to him for 20 years. She did not intend to stop. The rebozo morado went around her shoulders in the cool of the morning and stayed there into the afternoon when the sun had not yet made up its mind about the day. Zaro's almud came to the field as a spacing guide, set on the ground between holes the way it had always been set, the worn bottom of it pressing into the silt easily. The tin box of seeds waited on the corner of the cot until she was ready to open it. These 3 things made a kind of order out of what had been disorder, and she was grateful for the order. Concha came every other day and brought what she could. Ernesto stopped by and did what he saw needed doing without being asked, shored up the corner of the shelter where the tin had started to lift in the wind, cleared the silt from the path to the road, brought 2 other young men one afternoon, and moved the heaviest debris off the milpa in 2 hours. He did not ask for thanks. Remedios thanked him anyway. Concha's husband came once without Concha, carrying a full sack of dried beans, set it inside the shelter door, and left without a word. 3 women from the village came together one Saturday and swept the surrounding debris into a pile that Ernesto later hauled away. No one made a ceremony of any of it. That was how those hills had always worked, quietly, with actions, among people who understood that the body's help is sometimes more honest than any words. Victorio's assistant came on the 16th day with a formal letter from the Morelia firm. It said that without a valid deed on file, she had 30 days to vacate the premises before the firm would seek a court order. Remedios read the letter. She folded it carefully and put it in the tin box next to the seeds. "Tell him I received it," she said. The assistant left without looking at her. Padre Chernimo, who had been sitting near the fire when the assistant arrived, waited until the truck was gone. "Do you have a copy of the original deed?" he asked. "The original was lost in the flood," said Remedios. "I had a copy. The flood took that too." The padre was quiet for a moment. "Luzaro's father registered this land in 1934, he said. "I know because the registry blessing was the same month as his parents' anniversary. I performed that blessing." He looked at his hands. "I have the record in the church archive. The date and the boundary corners are in it." "But not the deed itself," said Remedios. "Not the deed, but the date and the corners. And a deed has to match a date, and a boundary has to match a survey." He looked at the milpa. Morales's claim would need to show that his boundary lines correspond to a legitimate survey that predates 1934. "I don't believe they can." What no one in that bend of the Cupatizio could have predicted was that the flood would not only take from Remedios, it would also give. It had been giving for 3 weeks already, steadily, without announcement, doing what floodwaters do when they recede, exposing what had been buried. The silt dried and cracked and pulled back from the edges of the property. Old fence posts appeared where no one had seen them in years. And in the northwest corner of the milpa, where Remedios planted each morning and where the seedlings were tallest, the silt had pulled back from something hard and pale that stood 4 inches above the ground. She had been stepping around it for 3 days before she stopped and knelt down. She brushed the remaining mud away with her hand. Cut stone, square-faced. A notary's mark chiseled into the top face. She called the padre. He came that same afternoon and knelt beside the stone with more agility than she would have expected from a man of 82. He ran his thumb across the notary's mark. He read it. He looked up at Remedios. "Mojonera," he said. "I know what it is," said Remedios. "1934, said the padre. He stood slowly. He looked across the milpa at the angle the stone implied, north-northwest, toward the river, and then he turned and looked toward the road, in the direction of Victorio's claimed boundary. The 1934 survey of this property had 4 corner markers. This stone is standing approximately 15 meters east of where Morales's surveyor placed your northeast corner. Remedios looked at the stone. She looked toward the road. She did the geometry without rushing. "His boundary line is wrong," she said. "His line is wrong," said the padre. "By 15 meters, in a direction that would give him a substantial portion of your milpa." They found the second mojonera 2 days later, on the south edge of the field, buried less than 4 inches under the deposited silt. The third was on the eastern line, fully exposed by the flood's recession, standing clear in the open air without any digging required. The fourth took 4 more days. It had been buried deeper than the others, perhaps considerably deeper than nature alone would account for, and Ernesto dug it free on a Tuesday morning with a short-handled spade. 4 stones, all in positions that matched the compass directions in Padre Chernimo's 1934 church archive record. All of them 15 to 20 meters inside the boundary that Victorio Morales had claimed. The entire boundary line in his filing had been drawn around positions that corresponded to no legitimate survey the Padre had any record of. He thought about it for 2 days before he said what he was thinking. He came on a Tuesday with the bread and sat at the small table Ernesto had built from salvaged planks and looked at his church archive lying open between them and said, in the careful way of a man who has spent a lifetime choosing words, "These stones were buried. The 3 we found first were 4 to 8 inches under the surface. The 4th was buried considerably deeper. Floodwaters recede and expose what is in the upper layers of soil. They do not generally expose what is buried half a meter down unless something has disturbed the ground above it." He folded his hands on the table. Someone buried that 4th stone. It did not sink on its own. Remedios looked at the archive. She looked at the open doorway of the tin shelter, through which she could see the Northwest Mojonera standing in the field. "How long ago?" she said. "I can't say," said the Padre. "But the stone itself has been there since 1934. Whatever was done to it was done after that." Remedios was quiet for a moment. "Then we go to the surveyor," she said. "Yes," said the Padre, "we do." Remedios sat that evening with the tin box in her lap and the almud on the ground beside her, and the rebozo pulled close against the October chill that came off the Cupatizio after dark. And she did not say anything for a long time. "Padre," she said finally, "what does it mean, in the end, for the claim?" "It means," he said, "that his surveyors either made a very serious error or they drew their line knowing it was wrong." He looked at the Northwest Mojonera, still visible in the dusk. "Either way, the line does not hold, and we now have 4 stones and 1 church record to prove it." Don Victorio Morales arrived on a Monday in late October with his surveyor from Morelia, a man named Ruiz, and a representative from the Municipal Land Office. The court had required an on-site survey before any order could issue. He came in 2 trucks. He came confident. He was not confident when he got to the northwest corner of the milpa. Padre Yernimo was there with the church archive under his arm. Concha was there with her arms folded across her chest. Ernesto stood with the short-handled spade, and the 4 mojoneras stood in the open air of the washed field, their 1934 notary marks legible to any professional eye. Ruiz looked at the northwest stone for a long time without speaking. He took out his measuring tape. He measured from the stone to the road. He looked at his survey map. He measured again. "What is it?" said Victorio. Ruiz moved to the south stone. He measured. He went to the eastern stone. He made notes in his field book and did not look up. "These markers," he said finally, addressing no one directly, "are not consistent with the boundaries drawn in the filed claim." "That is because the filed claim is incorrect," said Padre Yernimo. He opened the church archive and held it out to Ruiz, who took it, read it, compared the compass directions against his own notes, and was quiet for some time. Victorio stepped toward the Padre. "A church record is not a land registry document. It references the land registry survey," said the Padre. "The boundary corners are described. The municipal archive will have the corresponding 1934 entry for comparison." The Municipal Land Office representative, who had not spoken since arriving, cleared his throat. He asked Ruiz a question in a low voice. Ruiz answered briefly. The representative opened his notebook and began writing with the focused attention of a man who has understood something he would rather not have understood. Remedios had not said anything yet. She stood near the northwest mojonera with the rebozo around her shoulders and the tin box under one arm, and she looked at Victorio. "Las piedras no mienten, Señor Morales," she said. "They have been here since 1934. The only thing the flood changed was that now everyone can see them. Victorio looked at his surveyor. Ruiz had put away his measuring tape. Victorio looked at the municipal representative, who was writing carefully and not looking up. He looked at the 4 stones standing in the cleared earth. He looked at Remedios. "We'll need to review this," he said. "Take all the time you need," said Remedios. "I'll be here." He left. His surveyor followed. The municipal representative stayed a while longer, photographed each mohonera and the church archive record, told Remedios she would receive a letter within 10 days, shook the padre's hand, nodded to her, and drove away quietly. Concha looked at Remedios when they were gone. "He won't try again," she said. "No," said Remedios. "He won't." "How did you know to stay?" Remedios looked at the northwest mohonera. She looked at the rows of Mas Negro, 50 or 60 seedlings in the silt now, putting up their 3rd and 4th leaves. "I didn't know," she said. "I just wasn't done here." The letter from the municipal office came on the 8th day. It confirmed that the on-site survey had found the original 1934 mohoneras in situ, that their positions did not correspond to the boundaries asserted in the Morales claim, and that the claim had been suspended pending formal review of the original title records in the municipal archive. The letter did not say Remedios had won everything, but it said the land was not Victorio. That was enough for now. The Mas Negro came up in November, dark and tall in the flood-enriched silt, faster and fuller than it had grown in the dry year soil of recent seasons. By the end of the month, the rows stood shoulder-high, the ears beginning to set, the deep green leaves moving in the afternoon wind off the Cupetizio. Remedios walked the rows each morning the way she always had, the same route she had walked with Luzaro when they were both young, and the milpa was theirs together. She talked to the corn the way she had always talked to it, telling it what the weather had done the day before and what she expected of it, which was everything. Ernesto and 3 young men from the neighboring properties helped lay the new foundation in October, using stone from the ruined walls of the old house, which had not been carried away, but had simply come apart and lay in orderly rubble around the old floor. The padre said a blessing over the first stone. Concha organized the food for the workday. The walls went up adobe brick by adobe brick through November, and by December there was a roof on it and a door, and inside, a kitchen shelf and a window ledge, and a hook by the door. The tin box of seeds, mostly empty now, the Mas Negro growing tall in the field, went on the kitchen shelf. The Rebozo Morado hung on the hook by the door. Alzaro's almud sat on the window ledge where the afternoon light fell on it, the wood worn smooth and gray-brown, the old corn dust in its grain still faintly visible. Padre Chernimo came on a Tuesday in December, the first Tuesday since the house had walls again, and sat at Remedios's table and drank coffee. "How does it feel?" he said. "Like mine," said Remedios. The old priest smiled at his cup. "It always was." "Yes," she said. "It just took the river to make it something everyone could see. Sometimes what looks like the end is simply the ground clearing itself for what was always meant to be there." Remedios Gutierrez lost her house to the Cupetizio River and gained back the one thing that had been quietly taken from her: the visible proof of 70 years of presence on a piece of earth that had always been hers. The river did not give her justice. The river only uncovered what justice looked like. She had to be the one to stay and find it. Have you ever lost something and discovered that beneath the loss there was a truth that had been waiting to be seen? If this story reached something in you, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe to Countryside Tales so you never miss a story. Ring the notification bell. and share this with someone who needs to hear that staying is sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do. Until next time, with all our hearts, the land remembers, even when we forget it, even when the water comes for it, even when someone tries to draw a new line across it. The land remembers what it was given, and to whom.